The smell of stale grease has a way of clinging to you, seeping into the pores of your skin until you feel like you're wearing a coat of oil. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I was scraping the griddle at Burger Barn, a job that most people in this town looked at with a mixture of pity and disdain. I didn't mind the work. There's a meditation in the rhythm of the scrape, the hiss of the water hitting hot steel, and the final wipe that leaves the surface gleaming. It requires patience. It requires discipline. Two things I had in abundance, though nobody watching me in my paper hat and polyester uniform would ever guess where I learned them. "Hey, fry boy, you missed a spot." The voice came from the drive-through window, or rather, the customer leaning halfway out of his lifted truck to shout into the kitchen. It was typical. The late-night crowd usually consisted of teenagers looking for trouble or drunk businessmen looking to punch down. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, a small, polite curving of the lips that didn't quite reach my eyes, and continued cleaning. My name tag said Orion, but to them, I was just part of the machinery. I was 32 years old, standing 6'2", with broad shoulders that strained the seams of the cheap uniform. Yet I made myself small. I made myself invisible. My coworkers, mostly high school kids, looked at me with confusion. They couldn't understand why a man who looked like he could bench press the deep fryer was content flipping patties for minimum wage. They didn't know about the medical bills. They didn't know about my mother's long, agonizing battle with cancer that had drained every account I had. And they certainly didn't know that the man scraping the grill was the commander of the Shadow Spear Unit, a ghost operative who had once negotiated treaties in war zones. I had walked away from that life to hold my mother's hand as she took her last breath. Now she was gone, and all I wanted was a quiet life. But quiet, I was learning, was expensive. The bell above the door jingled, signaling a walk-in. It was my sister, Joanna. She shouldn't have been here this late. She should have been sleeping, resting up for her shift at the library. One look at her face told me everything I needed to know. Her eyes were red-rimmed, puffy from crying, and she was clutching a crumpled letter in her hand like it was a live grenade. I wiped my hands on a rag and signaled for my manager, a 19-year-old named Kyle, to cover the front. I met Joanna at the corner booth, the vinyl cracked and taped over with duct tape. "What happened?" I asked, my voice dropping to that low, steady timbre that used to calm panicked soldiers under fire. I sat opposite her, keeping my hands on the table, palms open. They denied the permit, Orion," she sobbed, sliding the paper across the sticky table. "The funeral is in 2 days. Mom wanted to be buried next to Dad in the Old Hills Cemetery. We paid for the plot years ago. You know we did." I picked up the letter. The letterhead was embossed with gold leaf. Briggs Development Corp. My jaw tightened, a muscle feathering near my ear. Colonel Briggs. Of course, the man was a vulture in a bespoke suit. He had bought up half the town in the last 3 years, leveraging dirty money and connections he'd made by selling out our own unit's logistics routes years ago. He had retired with a golden parachute, while I retired with a classified file and a vow of silence. It says here the cemetery is now considered part of the historic preservation zone for his new resort, I read, the words tasting like ash, and that new burials are prohibited due to aesthetic zoning laws. "He's building a golf course, Orion," Joanna whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's going to build a putting green over where Mom is supposed to rest. He's doing this because he knows we're Ravenwoods." She was right. Briggs hated our father, a man of integrity who had exposed Briggs' early corruption decades ago. This wasn't zoning. This was a grudge match. I looked at Joanna, seeing the fear in her eyes. She thought we were helpless. She thought her big brother was just a burger flipper who couldn't fight back. I folded the letter neatly, aligning the corners with military precision, and placed it in my pocket. "Go home, Joanna," I said gently. "Get some sleep. I'll handle this." "How?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We don't have money for a lawyer, Orion. We barely have money for the casket. You can't just go talk to him. He has security. He has the mayor in his pocket." "I'm not going to fight him," I said, and I meant it. Violence was a tool for the desperate, and I wasn't desperate yet. I'm just going to ask for a clarification. After she left, I finished my shift. The mindless repetition of cleaning allowed me to formulate a plan. The grand opening of the Patriot Sands Resort, Briggs' monstrosity, was tomorrow night. It was a black tie gala. The governor would be there, the press would be there, and crucially, the catering company hired for the event was Elite Eats, a staffing agency I picked up shifts for on the weekends. I wasn't on the roster for the gala, but I knew the owner. He was always short-staffed. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror in my small apartment. I shaved my face clean, the razor gliding over the sharp angle of my jaw. I ran a hand over my buzz-cut, dirty blonde hair. I looked into my own piercing blue eyes and saw the fatigue, but beneath it, the steel. I wasn't Commander Ravenwood today. I wasn't the man who had led operations in the Hindu Kush. I was just a server, a servant, and sometimes the servant sees more than the master intends. I called the catering agency. "I need the shift tonight," I told the dispatcher. "I don't care if it's bussing tables or washing dishes." "You're in luck, Orion," the dispatcher said. "Someone called out with the flu. We need a wine steward for the VIP section. Can you handle high-end clientele? You know, keep your mouth shut and pour?" "I'm very good at keeping my mouth shut," I replied. The Patriot Sands Resort was an exercise in narcissism. Marble floors, gold chandeliers, and massive portraits of Colonel Briggs in his dress blues adorned the walls. It was built on land that had been stolen from local families through eminent domain scams, including the easement to the cemetery. As I walked through the service entrance, buttoning the high collar of my white server's jacket, I felt a familiar coldness settle in my chest. It was the focus, the mission mindset. The ballroom was filling up. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than my annual rent swirled around with flutes of champagne. I moved through them like a ghost, offering refills, my posture perfect, my expression blank. I was part of the furniture. Then I saw him, Colonel Briggs. He was older now, heavier, his face flushed with expensive scotch and self-importance. He was holding court near the center of the room, laughing loudly at his own jokes. Surrounding him were the mayor and a few nervous-looking investors. I made my way toward his circle, a bottle of Dom Perignon in hand. I needed to gauge the room. I needed to see if there was any humanity left in him before I played my hand. "And that old boneyard out back?" Briggs was saying, gesturing with a cigar. "We're flattening it next month. Who needs a cemetery with a view of the ocean? The dead don't care about the view." The group laughed sycophantically. I stepped into the circle, bowing my head slightly. "Champagne, Colonel." Briggs stopped mid-laugh. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. He didn't recognize me at first. Why would he? To him, soldiers were just numbers, and servers were less than that. But then he looked closer. He saw the blue eyes. He saw the structure of the face. A flicker of recognition passed through his gaze, followed immediately by a sneer. "Well, well," Briggs said, his voice dripping with mock pity. "If it isn't Ravenwood. I heard you were back in town. Flipping burgers, isn't it? And now, pouring my drinks?" The conversation in the circle died instantly. The mayor looked uncomfortable. I didn't flush. I didn't look away. I just held the bottle steady, my hand as rock solid as a sniper's aim. "Honest work is honest work, Colonel," I said softly. "More champagne?" Briggs laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Honest work? Is that what you call it? Look at you. You had potential, boy. You could have been a general by now if you hadn't developed that bleeding heart. Now look at you, serving your betters." He snatched the glass from my tray. "Tell me, Ravenwood, How's that mother of yours? Still clinging on?" "She passed away on Monday," I said. The silence that followed was heavy, but Briggs broke it with a dismissive wave. "Pity. I suppose you're looking for a handout then. Is that why you're here? To beg for a plot in my new golf course?" "I'm here to do a job, sir," I replied, keeping my eyes forward, "and to ask, respectfully, that you honor the existing deed for the Ravenwood family plot. My father is buried there. My mother wishes to be beside him. It is consecrated ground." Briggs stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of scotch and arrogance. "Let me teach you a lesson about the real world, burger boy. Consecrated ground is just dirt until someone with money buys it. I own this town. I own that dirt, and I'm not having a fresh grave spoiling the view from my clubhouse. Now get out of my face before I have you thrown out." He turned his back on me. "It was a tactical error. You never turn your back on a threat, even one you think is neutralized. But I didn't strike. I simply bowed slightly, said, 'Enjoy your evening, Colonel,' and faded back into the crowd. He had made his choice. Now I would make mine." I retreated to the kitchen, but I didn't leave. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. The keynote speech was in 30 minutes. I pulled my phone from my locker. It was a cheap prepaid model, or so it looked. I entered a sequence of numbers that I hadn't used in 4 years. It bypassed the local cell towers and pinged a satellite directly. "Status," a voice answered. No greeting, just readiness.
"This is Sierra Kilo 1, I said quietly, leaning against the cold stainless steel of the industrial fridge. "I am activating the dormant protocol regarding Operation Gilded Cage. Target is confirmed. Location, Patriot Sands Resort. Requesting immediate extraction of sensitive assets and a presence." "Copy Sierra Kilo 1. We have been monitoring the target's financial movements for 6 months. We were waiting for your signal. ETA 20 minutes. Keep him there." I hung up and straightened my tie. I wasn't just a waiter anymore. I was the forward observer. I went back out to the floor. The atmosphere had shifted. Joanna had arrived. She wasn't on the guest list, but she had slipped past the front desk in her desperation. She was wearing her Sunday best, a modest black dress that looked out of place among the sequins and silk. She was trying to talk to the mayor, pleading with him, showing him the deed. "Please, Mr. Mayor," she was crying. "It's illegal. You can't let him do this." Security was closing in. 2 large men in ill-fitting suits, hired muscle that Briggs probably paid under the table. They grabbed Joanna by the arms, roughly. "You need to leave, miss. You're causing a scene." "Get off me!" Joanna screamed. The music stopped. The room turned to look. Briggs was watching from the stage, a glass of wine in his hand, looking bored. He nodded to the guards. "Throw the trash out." The guard twisted Joanna's arm behind her back. She cried out in pain. That was the line. That was the moment the mask slipped, just a fraction. I didn't run. I walked. But I walked with a pace that devoured the distance between the kitchen doors and the center of the ballroom. I set my tray down on a nearby table with a deliberate clink. "Unhand her," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the silent room like a crack of thunder. It was the command voice, the tone that stops panic and demands obedience. The guards paused, looking at the waiter in the white jacket. They laughed. "Go back to the kitchen, busboy," the larger one sneered, tightening his grip on Joanna. I closed the distance. I stood 2 feet from the guard. I didn't raise my hands. I kept them clasped behind my back, my chest out, my blue eyes drilling into his soul. I said, "Unhand her. You are applying excessive force to a civilian non-combatant. This is your final warning." Briggs shouted from the stage, "Get him out of here! Beat him if you have to!" The guard reached for me with his free hand, aiming to shove me back. I didn't strike him. I simply shifted my weight, a subtle pivot that let his hand slide harmlessly off my shoulder and stepped into his space.
I whispered something in his ear, a specific legal code regarding assaults and the precise amount of pressure required to dislocate a shoulder. The color drained from his face. He didn't know who I was, but his reptile brain recognized a predator. He let go of Joanna. She stumbled and I caught her, pulling her behind me. "Orion, what are you doing?" she wept. "They'll kill you." "No," I said, smoothing her hair. "They won't." Briggs was furious. He marched down the stairs from the stage, his face purple. "You think you're tough, Ravenwood? You think because you did a few tours you can disrupt my event? I am a colonel. I command respect." The room was electric with tension. The elite of the city watched, horrified and fascinated as the fast food workers stood down the tycoon. "You command nothing," I said, my voice calm, contrasting his rage. "You bought your rank, you sold your honor, and now you're trying to sell the resting place of a woman who had more courage in her little finger than you have in your entire bloodline." Briggs signaled to the entire security team. 5 more guards started to encircle us. "I'm gonna ruin you," Briggs spat. "I'm gonna make sure you never work in this state again. I'm gonna bulldoze that cemetery tonight." Suddenly, a low thrumming sound began to vibrate the windows. It grew louder, a rhythmic thwup, thwup, thwup that everyone recognized. The glassware on the tables began to shake. Floodlights from outside cut through the sheer curtains of the ballroom, blindingly bright. The sound of heavy engines, not cars but armored transport, roared from the driveway. The front doors of the resort, massive oak double doors, were thrown open. It wasn't the police. 6 men walked in. They wore charcoal gray tactical suits, not standard military issue, but the high-end, unmarked gear of Tier 1 operators. They moved in perfect synchronization, weapons holstered but their hands ready. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. They didn't look at the guests. They didn't look at Briggs. They looked at me. Behind them walked a man in a crisp Air Force general's uniform, 4 stars on his shoulder. General Vance, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Briggs' mouth fell open. He stammered, adjusting his tie. General Vance, what an honor. I didn't know you were coming. Security, stand down. It's the general." Briggs rushed forward, hand extended, a desperate, fawning smile plastered on his face. "Welcome to Patriot Sands, General. I am Colonel Briggs, retired. We are honored." General Vance walked right past Briggs. He didn't even blink at him. He walked straight to the center of the room, to the waiter standing in front of the crying woman. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. General Vance stopped 3 feet from me. He looked me up and down, taking in the cheap white waiter's jacket, the stain of wine on my cuff, the defiant tilt of my chin. Then, slowly, deliberately, the 4-star general snapped to attention. He raised his hand in a crisp, sharp salute. "Commander," Vance said. The word hung in the air. The 6 operators behind him also snapped to attention, saluting in unison. I held the pose for a second, letting the weight of it sink into the room, before I slowly returned the salute. "General," I replied. "At ease." The room gasped. Briggs looked like he was having a stroke. "General?" Briggs squeaked. He's a waiter. He works at Burger Barn. There must be a mistake." Vance turned slowly to face Briggs. The look of disgust on his face was withering. "This man," Vance said, his voice projecting to every corner of the room, "is Commander Orion Ravenwood, leader of the Shadow Spear Unit, the most decorated covert operative of the last decade. He is a man who has saved more lives than you have dollars in your bank account, Briggs." Vance turned back to me. "We received your signal, Commander, and the dossier you uploaded regarding the embezzlement of military reconstruction funds." I reached into my waiter's jacket and pulled out a small flash drive. I hadn't just been cleaning the grill all these months. I had been gathering intel. Briggs had been sloppy. "The evidence is all here, General. Fraud, racketeering, and illegal land seizure involving protected veteran burial sites." Briggs stumbled back, knocking over a table of hors d'oeuvres. "No, that's..."
That's classified. You can't. It was classified, I said calmly, until you threatened my family. The operators moved. It wasn't violent, it was surgical. 2 of them were beside Briggs before he could take another step. They didn't rough him up, they simply escorted him. One moment he was the king of his castle. The next, he was in handcuffs, being read his rights by a federal agent who had entered with the team. The mayor and the corrupt investors were trying to slink away toward the exits, but the other operators had already blocked the doors. The party was over. The reckoning had begun. Joanna was staring at me, her eyes wide, tears still drying on her cheeks. She touched my arm, her fingers trembling against the cheap fabric of my uniform. Orion? Shadow Spear? You told me you were in logistics. I turned to her, the command presence fading, replaced by the brother she knew. I took her hands. I was, in a way. I was in the business of solving problems, but I promised Mom I'd keep you safe. I didn't want this life near you. I wanted to be normal. I just wanted to be your brother. General Vance stepped forward, removing his cover. He looked at Joanna. Ma'am, your brother is a hero. He walked away from a promotion and a pension to come home and care for your mother. He refused to use his rank for special treatment, even when things got hard. That is the definition of honor. Vance looked at me. The president has authorized the immediate seizure of this property under the RICO Act. The cemetery is now federal land, protected in perpetuity. Your mother will be buried with full military honors, Commander. We will see to it. I felt a lump in my throat that no amount of discipline could swallow. Thank you, sir.
The funeral was 3 days later. It wasn't the small, sad affair we had feared. The Patriot Sands sign had been torn down. The fence blocking the cemetery was gone. It was a beautiful day. The sky was the same piercing blue as my eyes, or so Joanna told me. Hundreds of people showed up. Not just the townspeople who had been bullied by Briggs, but men and women from all over the country, soldiers I had served with, diplomats I had protected, people whose names I had never known, but who knew mine. We buried Mom next to Dad. An honor guard fired a 21-gun salute, the cracks echoing off the hills that were now safe from development. General Vance presented the folded flag to Joanna. She held it like it was made of glass. I stood in the back, wearing a simple black suit. No uniform. No medals. I didn't need them. I watched as Colonel Briggs' former associates, the mayor, the corrupt zoning board, watched from a distance, looking pale and small. They knew now. They knew that the quiet man who cleaned the grill was watching. After the ceremony, Vance approached me. We stood by the old oak tree that shaded my parents' graves. The unit is active again, Orion, Vance said quietly. We need a leader. The offer is always on the table. I looked at the fresh earth. I looked at Joanna, who was surrounded by friends, laughing through her tears for the first time in months. I looked at my hands. They were clean of grease, but they were also clean of blood. I appreciate it, General, I said, but I think I'm retired for good this time. What will you do? He asked. Surely not go back to the burger barn. I chuckled. No, but I hear this property is going to need a caretaker, someone to make sure the grass is cut and the fences are mended, someone to keep the wolves away. Vance smiled and shook my hand. The best man for the job. 6 months later, the town had changed. With Briggs in federal prison and his assets seized, the stranglehold on the local economy had loosened. Small businesses were returning. The air felt lighter. I was kneeling in the garden of the old cemetery, planting hydrangeas around the perimeter. It was hard work, dirty work. My knees were stained with mud and sweat dripped from my brow. I wiped it away with the back of my hand.
A black sedan pulled up to the gate. A young man in a suit got out. He looked nervous. He walked up the path, clutching a briefcase. "Excuse me?" he asked. "I'm looking for Mr. Ravenwood?" I stood up, dusting off my hands. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I looked like a gardener. "That's me." The young man looked confused. "Oh, I was expecting... Well, I'm from the city council. We have a petition regarding the expansion of the library. We were told to run it by you first, to ensure it doesn't infringe on the historic grounds." I smiled. It was a genuine smile. I wasn't the commander anymore. I wasn't the burger flipper. I was just Orion. But they knew. They all knew that this ground was protected by something stronger than a fence. "Let's take a look," I said, gesturing to the bench near my mother's grave. "I have some time." As we sat down, I glanced at the headstone. Martha Ravenwood, beloved mother. And below it, a small inscription I had added. "Peace is the soldier's final victory." I had fought wars across the globe. I had toppled dictators and dismantled cartels. But sitting there, in the quiet shade, listening to the birds sing, and knowing my sister was safe and my parents were at rest, this was the greatest victory of my life, and I didn't need a uniform to prove it.